In 2005, the world was introduced to what would become known as the worst horror movie ever made. The film, though advertised as an actual horror movie, is actually a hilarious mockumentary that parodies the chaos and frustrations often faced during low-budget filmmaking. What follows is a deep dive into the ridiculousness of the film's production, presented in a chronological sequence to showcase just how absurd and entertaining the journey of creating this disastrous horror movie truly was. So buckle up, because the journey behind the making of the worst horror movie ever made is as horrific as it is hilarious. The film opens with a charismatic, eccentric director, Paul Scavenger, who is clearly overly enthusiastic about his latest project, a low-budget horror film that he believes will change the genre forever. He describes his vision for the film with passion, detailing how this will be the scariest movie ever made. It's not just a horror movie, it's a horror experience. He rambles on about how the film will have themes that no one has dared to explore, and that the plot will be revolutionary. In his eyes, this is going to be his magnum opus. The camera follows him around as he passionately argues with his small, disinterested crew who are already questioning whether they'll survive the process. The director's confidence is only matched by his lack of budget and experience. His initial pitch to investors and his cast reveals just how far out of his depth he truly is. The script, already a jumbled mess, is only half finished, and the special effects budget is laughably low. In fact, most of the film's budget is spent on an over-the-top promotional campaign designed to fool potential backers into believing it will be a huge success. But the crew is determined to make it work, or at least, they have no choice but to try. As the production ramps up, the first major hurdle surfaces: casting. The film's director, convinced that he can pull off a big-budget horror experience on a shoestring budget, assembles a cast of unknown actors. Most of them are not only inexperienced but also questionable choices for their roles. The casting process is a disaster. Actors show up to auditions only to find themselves reading lines from a script that seems more like a collection of random horror cliches than an actual narrative. Some actors are miscast, others are underprepared, and some, honestly, should have never been allowed in front of a camera. Despite the chaos, the director insists that they're perfect for the roles. He's also very clear on one thing: he won't accept anything less than their best performances, regardless of their apparent lack of talent. As the documentary unfolds, interviews with the cast reveal a mix of confusion, disbelief, and forced enthusiasm about the project. They're in over their heads but are committed to making the film work, despite the overwhelming sense that something is terribly wrong. The director's overbearing attitude only adds to the tension. He constantly interrupts rehearsals, changing lines, shouting at actors, and demanding better performances even as the cast tries to get through basic scenes. Many of the actors begin to wonder whether they've made a terrible mistake, and some even consider quitting. But the director's persistence keeps them on set, even if they don't know what they're actually working on. The actual filming begins, and from the start, it's clear that the movie is doomed. The first few days on set are plagued by technical difficulties. The crew struggles with malfunctioning cameras, bad lighting, and low-quality sound equipment. The director's inability to properly communicate his vision leads to confusion on set, and every shot takes much longer than necessary. At one point, a shot meant to evoke horror ends up looking comically bad due to a random prop, a fake severed hand, falling out of the shot and into the frame, leaving the crew in fits of laughter. Despite all these issues, the director continues to push for perfection, oblivious to the mounting disasters around him. He insists that everyone stick with the vision, even as things continue to fall apart. Behind-the-scenes interviews reveal how the crew members are starting to lose patience. The film's lighting technician, in particular, starts to get visibly frustrated, muttering about how he's never worked on a more disorganized production. Meanwhile, the sound guy is horrified by how the actors keep improvising lines, making it nearly impossible to capture usable audio. The film's visual effects are another major hurdle. The director, convinced that he can still salvage the look of the film on a budget, begins to use old-school practical effects. Unfortunately, the crew's lack of skill in this area leads to some of the most unintentionally hilarious special effects ever put to film. There's a scene in which an actor is supposed to be killed by a grotesque monster, but the creature is so poorly crafted that it looks more like a balloon animal than a terrifying horror antagonist. As the monster awkwardly moves toward the victim, the actor can barely keep a straight face, leading to a cringeworthy yet laugh-out-loud moment. As filming progresses, the documentary begins to reveal cracks in the director's once overconfident facade. The pressure mounts as the quality of the footage continues to plummet. The director begins to show signs of stress. His once enthusiastic speeches turn into ramblings about how he's going to make the film a success no matter what. He constantly reassures the crew that it will all come together in post-production, even though everyone around him knows that the raw footage is a disaster. Tensions reach a boiling point during a particularly chaotic scene involving a haunted house. The director insists on doing a complex shot where an actor is supposed to walk through a hallway filled with flickering lights and ominous sounds. Unfortunately, the power goes out during the take, leaving the crew in total darkness. The director, unfazed by the technical malfunction, tells the cast to keep going, but it's impossible to continue the scene when no one can see anything. The cast and crew are visibly frustrated, and many start to doubt whether this film will ever be finished. At this point, post-production begins, and the true extent of the film's failures becomes evident. The director tries to salvage the film by adding special effects and editing, but the results are laughable. Bad CGI, inconsistent sound design, and bizarrely misplaced music cues fill the final cut. The film that was once supposed to be the next big horror hit now looks more like a fever dream that no one in their right mind would pay to see. As the director and his team watch the film come together in the editing room, they realize just how out of control the production has become. It's a mixture of disbelief, frustration, and absurdity. The film, now far from being the scariest movie ever made, is a complete mess, filled with awkward pacing, inconsistent acting, and visual effects that look like they were crafted by an amateur with no understanding of the genre. Despite the obvious train wreck that the movie has become, the director and his team prepare to release the film anyway, convinced that audiences will appreciate its rawness and unique vision. The crew members, now exhausted and disillusioned, can only watch in stunned silence as the premiere draws near. The premiere of the worst horror movie ever made is met with an almost immediate backlash. Audiences, expecting a chilling horror film, are instead met with something so bad that it can only be described as comically disastrous. As the film plays out on screen, viewers are left howling with laughter at the poor acting, bizarre plot twists, and laughable special effects. The director, still convinced that the film will be a cult classic, watches in agony as people leave the theater mid-screening. Despite the failure, the film garners attention for how spectacularly awful it is. Word spreads about the movie's unintentionally hilarious moments, and it becomes a favorite for midnight screenings. People begin to view it as an ironic masterpiece, much like The Room or Troll 2, where the sheer incompetence of its creation makes it enjoyable for entirely different reasons. The documentary ends with the director, somewhat defeated but still holding onto his dream, vowing to make a new film, one that, he promises, will truly be the scariest movie ever made. The final shot shows him rambling about his next big project, while the rest of the crew quietly walks off into the sunset, ready to never look back. The Worst Horror Movie Ever Made is a mockumentary that showcases the entire chaotic process of making a film that is a mix of failure, frustration, and unintentional comedy. The journey from pre-production to the disastrous premiere is a roller coaster of ridiculousness, where the filmmaker's sheer determination to create something great leads to a spectacularly bad final product. Though the film may not have been the horror masterpiece it was intended to be, its unintentional humor and ridiculousness have made it a beloved cult classic among fans of bad cinema.